She fed his disabled son for free every day, then discovered he owns the restaurant chain. She slipped the extra breadsticks onto his tray with a gentle smile, whispering to the silent boy, "Magic breadsticks for brave hearts." Never knowing that the man counting nickels beside him owned every restaurant in the city, and that her kindness was about to cost her everything she thought she knew about love. The morning sun filtered through the grease-stained windows of Romano's family restaurant, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Chen tied her apron strings for the third time, her fingers trembling slightly from exhaustion. She'd been up until 2 a.m. with Grandma Lu, holding cold compresses to the old woman's fevered forehead and whispering Mandarin lullabies that seemed to be the only thing that calmed her anymore. "Table 6 needs their check," barked Tony, the day manager, without looking up from his clipboard. His perpetual scowl had deepened over the past month as corporate kept breathing down his neck about numbers, efficiency, customer satisfaction scores. Maya nodded, smoothing her black hair back into its ponytail. The mirror behind the coffee station reflected a young woman who looked older than her 26 years. Dark circles under almond-shaped eyes, worry lines etched around her mouth like parentheses holding in all the words she couldn't afford to say. The breakfast rush was winding down, leaving behind the usual debris of syrup-sticky tables and coffee rings. Maya moved through the familiar choreography of cleaning, refilling, smiling at customers who barely saw her. She'd been working at Romano's for 3 years now, ever since Grandma Lu's diagnosis changed everything. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady, and Tony let her take home leftover bread and soup at the end of her shifts. "Maya," called Mrs. Patterson from table 12, waving her arthritic hand. "Could you be a dear and warm up my coffee? This arthritis has got me moving slower than molasses today." "Of course, Mrs. P." Maya hurried over with the pot, careful not to let any drip onto the elderly woman's crossword puzzle. Mrs. Patterson had been coming to Romano's every Tuesday and Thursday for 15 years, always ordering the same thing: black coffee, wheat toast, and scrambled eggs with a side of gossip about her neighbor's dog. "You look tired, honey," Mrs. Patterson observed, her pale blue eyes studying Maya with the intensity of someone who'd raised 6 children. "That grandmother of yours keeping you up again?" Maya forced a smile, the kind she'd perfected over years of pretending everything was fine. "She had a rough night, but she's better this morning. The new medication seems to be helping." It was a lie. The new medication cost $340 a month, and Maya had been rationing the pills, giving Grandma Lu half doses to make them last longer. The pharmacy had already called twice about the overdue prescription, and Maya had been avoiding their calls, knowing she wouldn't have the money until next week's tips came in. "Well, you give her my love," Mrs. Patterson said, patting Maya's hand with surprising warmth. "And don't you worry about that coffee refill charge. I know things are tight." Maya's throat constricted. Even the customers had started noticing her financial struggles. She mumbled a thank you and hurried back to the kitchen, blinking away tears that had no business falling during the breakfast shift. What do you think drives someone to keep giving when they have so little? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear about times when you've witnessed or experienced extraordinary kindness. 15 miles away, in a glass tower that scraped the belly of passing clouds, James Romano III stood at his office window and felt like he was drowning in success. The morning briefing lay scattered across his mahogany desk: profit margins, expansion reports, customer satisfaction surveys, employee turnover statistics. Romano's family restaurant had grown from his grandfather's single Brooklyn location to a 847-unit empire spanning 12 states. The numbers were impressive, the stockholders were happy, and James felt more disconnected from it all than ever. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board meeting has been moved up to 10:30. They want to discuss the Pittsburgh expansion." James loosened his Italian silk tie, a gesture that had become as routine as his morning espresso. "Tell them I'll be there." But he wouldn't be, not really. His body would occupy the leather chair at the head of the conference table. His mouth would form the right words about market penetration and quarterly projections, but his mind would be somewhere else entirely. It had been that way for months now, ever since David's latest evaluation. Severe autism spectrum disorder with nonverbal communication challenges. Recommended intensive behavioral intervention, occupational therapy, specialized educational support. The clinical language couldn't capture the reality of his 8-year-old son, who hadn't spoken a word in 2 years, who melted down when the routine changed by even 15 minutes, who could only eat certain foods prepared in exactly the right way. David was brilliant. James had seen him solve puzzles meant for teenagers, had watched him create intricate patterns with his building blocks that looked like architectural blueprints. But the world didn't have patience for David's kind of brilliance. James's ex-wife, Veronica, had made that clear when she'd moved to Los Angeles 6 months after the diagnosis. "I can't do this anymore, James. I married you, not this situation. David needs more than I can give him." The divorce had been swift and expensive. Veronica got the Hamptons house and a generous settlement. James got full custody of their son and the crushing weight of single parenthood while running a business empire. He picked up the framed photo on his desk. David at age 4, before the silence descended, grinning gap-toothed at the camera while holding a toy restaurant playset. They'd spent hours together building tiny tables and chairs, David narrating elaborate stories about the pretend customers who would visit their restaurant. "Daddy, this one wants extra breadsticks because she's really hungry," David had said in his sweet, piping voice. "And this one is sad, so we give him soup to make him feel better." Those had been the last complex sentences his son had spoken. James's phone buzzed. A text from Maria, David's full-time caregiver. "Good morning at school today. Very focused during puzzle time. Lunch will be at usual spot?" James typed back, "Yes. Romano's on 5th Street. 12:30. It had become their Tuesday and Thursday routine over the past 2 months. Maria would pick David up from his special school, and they'd meet James at whichever Romano's location he was quietly investigating. The corporate board didn't know about his incognito visits to their restaurants. They thought he was attending client meetings or market research sessions. In reality, James had been working his way through every Romano's location, one lunch at a time, trying to understand why customer satisfaction scores were dropping and employee turnover was climbing. He dressed down, worn khakis, old sweaters, scuffed shoes, and paid in cash, observing everything from wait times to food quality to how staff treated difficult customers. Most of what he'd discovered had been disappointing. Managers cutting corners, servers who seemed more interested in turning tables than serving people, food that barely met the standards his grandfather had set decades ago. The Romano's empire was profitable but soulless, and James felt responsible for every compromised meal and dismissive interaction. But there had been bright spots too. Small acts of kindness that reminded him why his grandfather had started the business in the first place, to create a place where families could gather and feel welcomed, where food was prepared with care and served with genuine warmth. The Romanos on 5th Street had become his favorite not because of the numbers, though they were solid, but because of Maya. He'd noticed her on his first visit 6 weeks ago. David had been having a difficult morning, stimmying more than usual, making the soft humming sounds that meant he was overwhelmed. James had been prepared for the usual scenario. Stares from other customers, impatient sighs from the server, the general discomfort that followed his son wherever they went. Instead, Maya had approached their table with a gentle smile and spoken directly to David. "Hi there, handsome. I'm Maya. Would you like to see our kids' menu, or do you already know what sounds good today?" David hadn't responded. He never did with strangers, but something in Maya's tone, the way she didn't speak over him or around him but to him, had made James's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. When David had pointed at the plain pasta on the menu, his safe food, one of only 6 items he would eat, Maya had nodded seriously. "Excellent choice. Penne or spaghetti? And how about some breadsticks to start? They're my personal favorite." She treated David like any other customer, with dignity and patience, never once asking James what was wrong with his son or offering unsolicited advice about therapy or diet changes. Over the weeks that followed, Maya had learned David's preferences, had started bringing extra breadsticks without being asked, had even figured out that David preferred his water in a glass rather than a plastic cup. More than that, she'd started looking forward to their visits. James could see it in the way her face lit up when they walked through the door, in the gentle way she ruffled David's hair when she brought their order, in the extra care she took to make sure everything was exactly right. Last week, When James had been short on cash, he'd been testing to see how staff handled customers who couldn't pay full price. Maya had quietly covered the difference and told David the breadsticks were on the house for good boys who eat all their vegetables. James had tried to pay her back the following visit, but she'd waved away his money with a smile that made his heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with business research. "David's my buddy," she'd said simply. "Friends take care of friends." Friends. When was the last time someone had considered James a friend without wanting something in return? When was the last time someone had treated David like a complete person rather than a collection of symptoms and challenges? James glanced at his Rolex, a graduation gift from his father that felt heavier on his wrist with each passing year. It was almost time to leave for lunch, time to shed his executive persona and become just James again, the quiet man who counted change and loved his son and had started looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays more than board meetings and profit reports. He grabbed his worn jacket from the closet, the one Veronica had always hated, and headed for the elevator. In the reflection of the polished steel doors, he practiced his regular customer smile, the one that hid a net worth of $47 million and the weight of expectations that came with the Romano name. Today, like every Tuesday and Thursday, he would be nobody special. Just a father trying to give his son a normal lunch and finding, in the process, something he hadn't expected to be looking for, a reason to believe in kindness again. Thursday arrived with an October chill that made Maya pull her thin cardigan tighter as she walked to work. The morning shift had been unusually busy. A water main break on 3rd Street had rerouted foot traffic past Romano's, bringing in customers who'd never set foot in the neighborhood before. Maya had been running between tables since 7 a.m., her feet aching in shoes that had been resoled twice and were now held together more by hope than leather. But at 12:25, she found herself glancing toward the front door with anticipation. James and David would be here soon for their regular Thursday lunch, and Maya had saved their favorite corner booth, the one with the window that David liked to look out while he ate. The lunch crowd was thinning when she spotted them through the glass. James in his usual navy sweater, David walking beside him with his precise, measured steps. The boy never ran or skipped like other children, but moved with a careful deliberateness that Maya had learned to respect and admire. "There are my favorite guys," she said as they approached, crouching down to David's eye level. "Hey, David. How was school today?" David didn't respond verbally. He never did. But he made brief eye contact with Maya, which she'd learned was his way of acknowledging her presence. It had taken weeks for him to feel comfortable enough to look at her directly, and Maya treasured those moments of connection. "Rough morning," James said quietly, settling into the booth. "New substitute teacher. David doesn't handle changes well." Maya nodded, noting the tension in James's shoulders, the way David was stimmying more than usual, his hands flapping slightly as he processed the unfamiliar environment of the restaurant. She'd been working with special needs kids during her volunteer shifts at the community center, and she'd learned to read the signs. "You know what?" Maya said, her voice gentle and steady. "I think today calls for extra magic breadsticks. The really special ones." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a basket of warm breadsticks, but these were different, cut into fun shapes, with a small cup of David's favorite marinara sauce arranged in a smiley face pattern on the plate. David's flapping slowed, and for the first time that day, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Maya, you didn't have to," James started, but she was already pulling out her phone. "David, want to see something cool?" She showed him a photo she'd taken earlier that morning, a cardinal perched on the restaurant's windowsill. "He came to visit right before you got here. I think he knew you were coming." David studied the photo intently, then looked toward the window where the cardinal had been. His whole body seemed to relax, the overwhelming energy of the morning finally settling into something more manageable. "He likes birds," James said softly, wonder in his voice. "How did you know?" Maya smiled, remembering the small notebook she'd been keeping, David's preferences, his reactions to different foods and situations, the little things that made him comfortable. "I notice things. He always looks toward the window when we hear birds chirping. And last week, he arranged his penne pasta in a pattern that looked like a bird's nest." James stared at her, something shifting in his expression. In 8 years of specialists, therapists, and well-meaning relatives, no one had ever taken the time to truly observe his son the way Maya did. No one had ever seen David's patterns as meaningful rather than just behaviors to redirect. "You really see him," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course I do," Maya replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "David's amazing. He's got this incredible mind. He just experiences the world differently than most people." She sat down across from them, something she'd never done during their previous visits. The lunch rush was over, and Tony was in the back office doing inventory. For the first time, Maya felt like she could really talk to James, really connect with this quiet man who clearly adored his son. "Can I ask you something?" she said hesitantly. "And please don't feel like you have to answer if it's too personal." James nodded, his full attention on her face. "Is it just you and David? I mean, I know it's none of my business, but I never see anyone else with you, and sometimes you look so tired, like you're carrying the whole world." James's breath caught. He'd been asked about David's mother before, usually by people who assumed he was a single father by choice or circumstance. But Maya's question wasn't about judgment or curiosity. It was about genuine concern, about seeing him as a person who might need support. "It's just us," he said quietly. "David's mother, she couldn't handle the autism diagnosis. She left when he was 6. Maya's face crumpled with empathy. "I'm so sorry. That must have been incredibly hard for both of you." "It was," James admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "I was angry for a long time. At her, at the doctors, at God. I thought I was supposed to be able to fix everything, you know? Provide for him, protect him, make his world perfect. But I can't fix autism, and I can't make people understand him the way I do." "The way we do," Maya corrected gently. "Understanding doesn't require fixing, James. Love doesn't require fixing." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. James felt something crack open in his chest, a door that had been sealed shut since Veronica left, since he'd learned to navigate single parenthood while running a business empire that demanded perfection. "Tell me about you," he said suddenly. "I feel like I do all the talking, but I don't know anything about Maya Chen. What's your story?" Maya hesitated, unused to being the focus of attention. "There's not much to tell. I work here, I take care of my grandmother, I volunteer at the community center when I can. Pretty boring life." "I doubt that," James said with a small smile. "Someone who notices that David arranges his food in bird patterns is definitely not boring." Maya laughed, a sound that made David look up from his breadsticks with interest. "Okay, you want to know something interesting? I speak 4 languages, and I'm probably the only person in this neighborhood who can fold a fitted sheet properly on the first try." "4 languages?" James raised an eyebrow. "Mandarin, English, Spanish, and enough Korean to order food and ask for directions. My grandmother insisted on the Chinese. I learned Spanish from my coworkers, and I picked up Korean from the family who runs the grocery store down the street. Languages are like puzzle pieces. They help you understand people better." James found himself leaning forward, genuinely fascinated. "What else? What do you do when you're not here?" "I read to kids at the library on Sunday mornings. I grow herbs on my fire escape. Nothing fancy, just basil and cilantro and mint. I collect vintage postcards from places I've never been." Maya paused, looking almost embarrassed. "And I write letters to soldiers overseas. There's a program through the VA hospital." "You write to soldiers?" "My grandfather served in Vietnam. He used to tell me that the worst part wasn't the fighting, it was feeling forgotten. So I write letters to remind people that someone back home is thinking about them." Maya shrugged. "It's not much, but it's something." James stared at her, this woman who worked double shifts and barely made ends meet, but still found time to read to children and write to strangers who needed comfort. He'd met millionaires who gave enormous tax-deductible donations to charity, but wouldn't spare a smile for their own employees. Here was Maya, who had next to nothing but gave everything. "That's beautiful," he said, and meant it. Their conversation was interrupted by David, who had finished his pasta and was now arranging his remaining breadsticks in a careful pattern on his plate. Maya watched him work, noticing the precision and intention behind each placement. "David," she said softly, "is that a story?" David looked up at her, his dark eyes bright with intelligence. For a moment, James thought his son might actually speak. There was something in David's expression that looked like he was trying to find words. Instead, David pointed to the breadsticks, then to Maya, then to himself. The pattern he'd created looked like three figures standing together, a family. Maya's eyes filled with tears. That's the most beautiful story I've ever seen. And in that moment, watching his son communicate with someone who truly understood him, watching Maya see David's artwork as meaningful rather than just stimming behavior, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not hope that David would suddenly become neurotypical, or that the challenges would disappear. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to navigate this alone anymore. "Maya," he said quietly, "would you like to have dinner with us sometime? Away from here, I mean. Somewhere nice." Maya's breath caught. She looked at James, really looked at him, and saw past the worn clothes and careful economy to the man underneath. The one who loved his son fiercely, who noticed when she was tired, who listened to her stories about herbs and postcards like they were the most interesting things in the world. "I'd like that," she whispered. David looked up from his breadstick family, and for the first time in months, made a sound that wasn't humming or stimming. It was soft, barely audible, but it sounded almost like laughter. What do you think happens when two people who've given up on love suddenly find it in the most unexpected place? Have you ever experienced a moment that changed everything? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Outside, the cardinal returned to the windowsill, and David pointed excitedly, his face lighting up with pure joy. Maya and James exchanged a look over his head, a moment of connection that felt like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. But 45 minutes later, as Maya cleared their table and found a $20 tip on a $12 meal, she had no idea that the man who'd just asked her to dinner owned the building she worked in, the chain she served, and enough restaurants to feed half the city. And James had no idea that his generosity, meant as appreciation for her kindness, represented nearly a full day's wages for the woman he was falling in love with. The emotional spark had been lit, but the fire that would follow would test everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the price of truth. Maya stared at the $20 bill in her hand long after James and David had left, her mind spinning with confusion and something that felt dangerously close to shame. She'd worked at Romano's long enough to know the math. A $12 meal didn't warrant a tip that was more than half the cost. Either James had made a mistake, or, "What's got you looking like someone stole your lunch money?" Tony appeared beside her, eyeing the bill with interest. "Nothing," Maya said quickly, folding the money and tucking it into her apron pocket. "Just thinking." But she couldn't stop thinking. All afternoon, as she served other customers and cleaned tables, Maya found herself replaying every interaction she'd had with James over the past 6 weeks. The way he always paid in exact change or small bills. How he'd seemed embarrassed that day when his card was declined. The worn edges of his sweater, the scuffed shoes, the careful way he counted out money for David's meal. And yet, $20. On a $12 check. From a man who supposedly struggled to afford lunch for his disabled son. By closing time, Maya had convinced herself that James must have grabbed the wrong bill from his wallet. Maybe he'd meant to leave a 5 and accidentally pulled out a 20. The thought of him discovering the mistake later, realizing he'd spent grocery money or medicine money on an excessive tip, made her stomach clench with anxiety. She had to give it back. It was the right thing to do. 15 miles away, James sat in his home office, ostensibly reviewing quarterly reports, but actually replaying every moment of lunch with Maya. The way she'd noticed David's love of birds. How she'd sat across from them like they were friends, not just customer and server. The genuine warmth in her voice when she'd talked about writing letters to soldiers. And David, God, David had been more engaged today than James had seen him in months. The breadstick family, that almost laugh, the way he'd looked at Maya like she understood a language only he spoke. James found himself Googling restaurants in the area, looking for somewhere nice, but not too fancy for their dinner date. Somewhere David would feel comfortable, somewhere Maya would feel. What? Special? Appreciated? His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. tomorrow. Mr. Patterson wants to discuss the 5th Street location specifically, Customer satisfaction scores are above average, but profit margins are still concerning. James frowned. The 5th Street location. Maya's restaurant. He'd been so focused on observing the staff and food quality during his visits that he hadn't paid attention to the actual numbers. But now, thinking about it from a corporate perspective, he could see the issues. Prime real estate, high rent, small profit margins despite decent customer volume. The kind of location that might get flagged for restructuring. James set down his phone, unease settling in his chest. Romano's corporate strategy had been shifting toward higher volume, lower service locations. Streamlined menus, faster turnover, reduced staff. Everything his grandfather would have hated, but everything the stockholders demanded. He'd been so caught up in Maya and David's connection that he'd temporarily forgotten the bigger picture. He wasn't just James the customer. He was James Romano III, heir to an empire that was always looking for ways to cut costs and maximize profits. What would Maya think if she knew? Would she still see their connection as genuine, or would she assume he'd been slumming, playing dress-up among the common people? Would she think he'd been judging her, evaluating her performance like some kind of secret shopper? The thought made him nauseous. James walked to David's room, where his son was arranging his bedtime books in precise rows on his nightstand. David looked up when his father entered, and James could swear he saw something different in his son's eyes, a brightness that hadn't been there this morning. "Hey, buddy," James said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Did you like seeing Maya today?" David nodded, then reached for one of his books, a picture book about birds that his speech therapist had recommended. He opened to a page showing a cardinal and pointed at it, then pointed toward the window. "You liked Maya's cardinal picture," James interpreted. "She's pretty special, isn't she?" David nodded again, more emphatically this time. Then he did something that stopped James's heart. He placed his small hand over James's and squeezed, just once. In 8 years of single parenthood, through countless therapy sessions and medical appointments and sleepless nights, James had learned to read his son's nonverbal communication. But this was clear in any language. David was happy. Maya made David happy, which made what James was contemplating even more impossible. How could he tell Maya the truth about who he was without destroying everything they'd built? How could he explain that their Tuesday and Thursday lunches weren't just random encounters, but part of his corporate reconnaissance? That every kind gesture she'd made, every extra breadstick and patient moment with David, had been observed by the man who could decide her restaurant's fate with a single phone call? And how could he not tell her? How could he build a relationship on a foundation of lies, even lies of omission? James tucked David into bed, kissing his forehead and whispering the same goodnight ritual they'd maintained since David was a baby. "Sweet dreams, brave boy. Daddy loves you more than all the stars." But as he turned off the light and closed the door, James felt the weight of his deception settling around him like a straitjacket. Tomorrow he would sit in a boardroom and discuss profit margins for the restaurant where the woman he was falling for worked double shifts to pay for her grandmother's medication. He would review efficiency reports on the location where Maya created moments of magic for his son with shaped breadsticks and bird pictures. He would have to choose his growing feelings for Maya or his responsibilities to Romano's empire. And he was terrified that either choice would cost him everything. Maya's apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades. The elevator had been broken for 3 years, the radiator clanged like a percussion section, and the refrigerator made sounds that suggested it was plotting revenge. But it was home, and more importantly, it was what she could afford while still covering Grandma Lou's medical expenses. "Maya, is that you, little dumpling?" Grandma Lou's voice drifted from the bedroom, thin but alert. "It's me, Nai," Maya called back, using the Mandarin word for grandmother. She hung her coat on the hook by the door and went to check on the elderly woman who had raised her since she was 12. Grandma Lou was sitting up in bed, her silver hair braided down her back, working on a crossword puzzle despite the fact that her vision had been deteriorating for months. At 78, she was still sharp as a tack mentally, but her body was betraying her in small, expensive ways. "How was work today?" Grandma Lou asked, patting the bed beside her. "You look different. Like you have something to tell me." Maya settled onto the worn comforter, still clutching the $20 bill in her pocket. "Nai, What would you do if someone gave you something that was too much? Something you didn't earn? Ah, Grandma Lou said with a knowing smile. This is about a man. What? No. I mean. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. Maybe. It's complicated. Love is always complicated, dumpling. That's what makes it worth having. Maya pulled out the $20 bill and showed it to her grandmother. One of my regular customers left this tip today. But the meal was only $12, and I know he doesn't have much money. He's a single father with a special needs son, and I've seen him count out exact change for their meals. This has to be a mistake. Grandma Lou examined the bill, then studied Maya's face with the intensity that had once intimidated bill collectors and school principals. And what does your heart tell you about this man? That he's kind, that he loves his son more than anything, that he sees me, really sees me, in a way that most people don't. Maya's voice dropped to a whisper. And that maybe, for the first time in my life, someone might actually care about me the way I care about other people. But I can't start something with a lie between us. If he made a mistake with the tip, I need to give it back. And if he didn't, Maya trailed off, not wanting to voice her fear. If he didn't make a mistake, then you're afraid he pities you. Grandma Lou finished gently. You're afraid his kindness comes from seeing you as a charity case rather than as a woman worth loving. Maya nodded, tears threatening. This was why she'd stopped believing in romantic love years ago, because it always came with conditions, with power imbalances, with the potential for humiliation. Little dumpling, Grandma Lou said, taking Maya's hands in her weathered ones, let me tell you something about your grandfather. When I met him, I was working in a factory, and he was a college student. I was convinced he was slumming, amusing himself with a poor girl before he married someone suitable. What happened? I almost threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too proud to believe I deserved love. Grandma Lou squeezed Maya's hands. Your grandfather had to practically kidnap me to get me to listen when he proposed. Turned out, he'd been working 2 jobs to save money for our wedding, living on rice and tea so he could buy me a ring. Maya stared at her grandmother. You never told me that story. Because you were too young to understand that sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes the fairy tale is real, even when you're convinced it can't be. Grandma Lou smiled. But you'll never know unless you're brave enough to find out. Maya looked down at the $20 bill, her mind made up. I'm going to give it back to him. Tomorrow, when he comes in for lunch. And then, maybe I'll say yes to dinner. If he still asks. But even as Maya said the words, doubt gnawed at her. What if James's kindness was just pity? What if she was setting herself up for the kind of heartbreak she'd spent years protecting herself from? What if she wasn't enough, not interesting enough, not sophisticated enough, not worthy enough, for a man who could afford to tip more than her hourly wage? Why do you think we sometimes find it harder to accept love than to give it? What fears hold us back from believing we deserve happiness? Share your thoughts. I think we've all been there. Maya fell asleep that night clutching the $20 bill, her dreams filled with breadstick families and cardinals, and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than she'd ever dared to believe. But in those same dreams, she heard the whispered voices of every person who'd ever left her. Her parents, her ex-boyfriend who'd called her too intense, the customers who looked through her like she was invisible. The voices that said love was conditional, temporary, and always too good to be true. Friday morning arrived with the kind of autumn storm that made people want to stay in bed with hot coffee and good books. Rain lashed against the windows of Romano's, and the wind rattled the old building's bones. Maya had been at work since 6 a.m., preparing for what Tony predicted would be a slow day due to the weather. She was wrong. By 10 a.m., the restaurant was packed with people seeking shelter from the storm. A power outage had closed the shopping center down the street. A burst water pipe had flooded the community center, and Romano's had become an unofficial refuge for half the neighborhood. Maya moved between tables like a dancer in a storm, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups while mentally rehearsing what she would say to James when he arrived. She'd practiced a dozen different ways to return the $20, casual, direct, apologetic, matter of fact. But each approach felt wrong, loaded with implications she wasn't ready to unpack. At 11:45, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Maya, this is James. David and I are stuck at his school, flooding in the parking lot. Might be late for lunch, or might not make it at all. Didn't want you to worry. Jay. Maya stared at the message, surprised by the flutter of disappointment in her chest. She'd been nervous about seeing James, yes, but she'd also been looking forward to it, more than she wanted to admit. She was about to text back when the restaurant's lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie amber glow, and the hum of conversation was replaced by murmurs of concern. Generators out, Tony announced from behind the counter. Storm must have knocked out the power grid. We're going to have to close. But as Tony spoke, Maya looked around at the customers. Elderly Mrs. Patterson with her oxygen tank, the young mother with twin toddlers who'd been waiting for the bus, the construction workers who'd been caught in the rain without proper gear. They had nowhere else to go. Tony, Maya said quietly, what if we don't close? We've got a gas stove, and the emergency lighting will last for hours. We could serve simple stuff, soup, sandwiches, coffee. People need somewhere warm and dry. Tony shook his head. Corporate policy says we close if we lose power. Liability issues. Maya felt something spark inside her. The same thing that made her write letters to soldiers and read to children at the library. Then don't tell corporate. I'll take responsibility. I'll work for free if I have to. Maya, you can't. Yes, I can. She was already tying her apron tighter, already moving toward the kitchen. Mrs. Patterson needs her coffee, and those babies need somewhere warm. I'm not kicking people out into a storm because of policy. What Maya didn't know was that her text reply to James, stay safe. We'll be here when the storm passes, had reached him just as he was making a difficult decision of his own. James sat in his Range Rover in the school parking lot, watching water swirl around the wheels of stranded cars. David was safe inside the school with his aide, but they couldn't leave until the water receded. James had been fielding calls from his office all morning. Emergency board meetings, crisis management protocols, damage assessments for Romano's locations affected by the storm. And then Maya's text arrived with its simple promise, we'll be here. When was the last time someone had said that to him? When was the last time someone had offered certainty, stability, presence without conditions or qualifications? James made a decision that would have shocked his board of directors. He turned off his phone, locked it in the glove compartment, and settled in to wait. For the first time in years, Romano's empire would have to function without him for a few hours. Because Maya had said they'd be there when the storm passed, and James found himself believing in promises again. By 2 p.m., Romano's had transformed into something magical. Maya had convinced Tony to let her stay, and together they'd created a makeshift community center in the amber glow of emergency lighting. She'd made endless pots of coffee on the gas burners, served grilled cheese sandwiches to anyone who was hungry, and organized the children into a storytelling circle near the big window. Mrs. Patterson had become the unofficial grandmother of the group, entertaining the toddlers with tales from her 6 decades of marriage. The construction workers had helped move tables to create more comfortable seating areas. Someone had brought out a deck of cards. Someone else had started a sing-along of old songs that everyone knew. Maya moved through it all like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of human kindness. She made sure the elderly customers had warm blankets from the storage closet. She found crayons and paper placemats for the children. She listened to the young mother's worries about missing work and assured her that staying safe was more important than perfect attendance. You know, Mrs. Patterson said as Maya refilled her coffee for the 4th time, I've been coming to this place for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. You've turned a power outage into a neighborhood party. Maya smiled, feeling more energized than she had in months despite working nonstop. People just needed a place to belong today. Everyone deserves that. It was then that the front door opened, sending a gust of wind and rain through the restaurant. James stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, with David tucked safely under his jacket. Both of them looked like refugees from the storm. Oh my God, Maya breathed, rushing toward them. You're both freezing. Come here. She wrapped David in a dry tablecloth, her hands gentle and sure as she checked him for signs of distress. The boy was overwhelmed by the change in routine and environment, his eyes wide with anxiety. Hey, David, Maya said softly, crouching to his level. I know this is different and scary. But look around. It's like a big indoor picnic. And Mrs. Patterson is telling stories about the old days. Want to hear about the time she met a movie star? David's stimming slowed as he processed Maya's calm voice and familiar presence. He nodded, allowing her to guide him toward the storytelling circle. James watched this interaction with something close to awe. In the space of 30 seconds, Maya had assessed David's needs, provided comfort, and offered distraction, all while managing a restaurant full of storm refugees. "How did you?" he started, but Maya was already pulling him toward the kitchen. "Your lips are blue," she said, all business. "Tony, do we have any dry clothes in the lost and found?" "Maya, I'm fine." "You're not fine, you're hypothermic. Sit." She pushed him onto a stool and disappeared, returning moments later with a Romano's staff t-shirt and an apron. "It's not fashionable, but it's dry and warm." James looked at the uniform. The same uniform Maya wore every day, the same one he'd been photographed in for corporate newsletters and annual reports. The irony was not lost on him. "I can't take your—" "James." Maya's voice was firm. "You're shivering, you're soaked, and your son needs you healthy. Put on the damn shirt." Something in her tone brooked no argument. James found himself changing in the supply closet, the Romano's logo stretching across his chest like a scarlet letter. When he emerged, Maya was waiting with a steaming cup of coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich. "Eat," she commanded. "And then you're going to help me serve soup to table 6, because we're short-staffed and I could use an extra pair of hands." "Maya, I don't know how to." "You can carry a bowl and smile at people. That's literally the entire job description." She thrust an apron at him. "Welcome to the service industry." And so James Romano III, heir to a restaurant empire, found himself working a shift at his own establishment. Not as the owner conducting research, but as Maya's assistant, following her lead and learning what it actually meant to serve people. For the next 3 hours, James carried trays, refilled coffee cups, and wiped down tables. He listened to Mrs. Patterson's stories about her late husband. He helped the young mother keep her twins entertained. He watched Maya orchestrate chaos into community with nothing but kindness and determination. And slowly, something fundamental shifted in his understanding of what Romano's was supposed to be. "You're good at this," Maya said during a brief lull, watching James distribute crayons to the children. "Have you ever worked in a restaurant before?" James felt the weight of his deception like a stone in his chest. "Something like that," he said carefully. "Well, you're a natural. The customers love you, and David seems calmer with you nearby." Maya smiled, unaware that she was describing a man who owned 847 restaurants but had never actually worked in one. "Maybe you should consider a career change." "Maybe I should," James murmured, and for the first time in years he meant it. As the afternoon wore on, James found himself in conversations he'd never had as a corporate executive. The construction workers told him about struggling to find steady work, about the dignity that came from building things with your hands. The elderly customers shared stories about fixed incomes and rising costs, about the importance of places like Romano's where they could afford to feel welcome. And through it all, Maya moved like grace personified, seeing needs before they were voiced, solving problems before they became crises, making everyone feel valued and cared for. "She's something special, your girl," Mrs. Patterson told James during a quiet moment. "In 50 years of marriage, I learned to recognize real love when I see it. The way she looks at your boy, the way she looks at you, that's the real thing." "She's not James started, then stopped. Because watching Maya teach David how to fold napkins into different shapes, seeing her face light up when his son actually laughed out loud, James realized that Mrs. Patterson might be right. Maya wasn't just someone he was attracted to. She was someone he was falling in love with. And he was lying to her about everything. The storm began to clear around 6 p.m., and gradually, customers started leaving. The young mother gathered her twins with promises to return soon. The construction workers left generous tips and handshakes. Mrs. Patterson hugged Maya like a granddaughter. Soon, only James, David, and Maya remained in the amber-lit restaurant. "Well," Maya said, surveying the aftermath, "that was either the best shift of my life or the most chaotic. I'm not sure which." "It was beautiful," James said, and he meant it. "What you did today, creating community out of chaos, making everyone feel safe and welcomed. That's extraordinary. Maya blushed, and used to such praise. It's just what people do, isn't it? Take care of each other when things get difficult. No, James said quietly, thinking of board meetings where people were treated as profit margins, of corporate strategies that prioritized efficiency over humanity. It's not what most people do. It's what exceptional people do. They stood in the dim restaurant, surrounded by the remnants of an impossible day, and James felt the $20 bill burning in his pocket. Not the one Maya wanted to return, but the one he'd brought to tip her again, another small gesture that would seem generous to her, but meaningless to him. The disparity between their worlds had never felt more vast or more wrong. Maya, he said, his voice thick with emotion, about dinner. Actually, Maya interrupted, pulling the crumpled 20 from her apron. I need to give this back to you first. You left too much yesterday. I know you don't have money to spare, and I can't keep it knowing you might need it for David's medicine or food or… Keep it, James said, his heart breaking. Please. James, I can't. It's too much. It's not enough, he whispered, and the words carried weight Maya couldn't possibly understand. It's nowhere near enough. Maya stared at him, confused by the pain in his voice, by the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and breakable and impossible to hold on to. Outside, the storm was ending, but inside Romano's, a different kind of tempest was just beginning. The rain started at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, turning the city streets into rivers and washing away Maya's plans for a quiet weekend. She'd been looking forward to sleeping in, maybe visiting the farmer's market with Grandma Lou, possibly even allowing herself to daydream about her upcoming dinner with James. Instead, she found herself standing in 2 inches of water in Romano's basement, watching Tony pace back and forth like a caged animal while the ancient boiler hissed and gurgled its final breaths. 30 years I've been managing restaurants, Tony muttered, running his hands through his thinning hair. 30 years, and I've never seen a mess like this. The health inspector's coming Monday, corporate's been breathing down my neck about numbers, and now this. Maya surveyed the damage, soaked inventory, ruined equipment, and a smell that suggested something had died in the walls months ago. The restaurant would be closed for at least a week, maybe longer, which meant no income, no tips, and definitely no money for Grandma Lou's medication refill. What do you need me to do? She asked, rolling up her sleeves. Go home, Maya. There's nothing we can salvage down here. I'll call corporate, file the insurance claim. Pray they don't decide this is the perfect excuse to shut us down permanently. Maya's stomach dropped. They wouldn't do that, would they? Tony's expression told her everything she needed to know. Romano's corporate had been consolidating locations, closing underperforming restaurants, streamlining operations. The 5th Street location might serve decent food and have loyal customers, but it wasn't a profit center. As Maya walked home through the rain, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi Maya, this is James. Got your number from the staff contact list Tony keeps by the register. Heard about the flooding. Are you okay? Is there anything David and I can do to help? Maya stared at the message, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. James had somehow heard about the restaurant closing, probably from another customer, and his first thought had been to check on her well-being. She typed back, I'm okay, thank you for asking. Just worried about work. Hoping we reopen soon. His response came immediately. Would you like to grab coffee? I know a place that's open on Saturdays. David would love to see you, and honestly, so would I. Maya hesitated. She looked terrible, hair damp from rain, clothes smelling like flood water, exhaustion written across her face. But the thought of spending the morning alone in her apartment, worrying about money and employment, felt worse than showing up disheveled for coffee. Okay, but I look like I wrestled with a basement flood and lost. You always look beautiful to me. The simple honesty of his response made Maya's breath catch. When was the last time someone had called her beautiful and meant it? They met at a small cafe 3 blocks from Maya's apartment, the kind of place that served coffee in mismatched mugs and let customers linger over crossword puzzles without pressure to order more. David was drawing in a sketchbook when Maya arrived, his tongue poking out in concentration. Hey there, artist, Maya said, sliding into the booth across from them. What are you working on? David showed her his drawing, a detailed sketch of the cardinal from Thursday's lunch, perched on a branch that looked remarkably similar to the restaurant's window frame. "David, this is incredible," Maya breathed. "You have real talent." James watched his son beam under Maya's praise, and something shifted in his chest. "He's been drawing nonstop since Thursday. Birds, mostly, but also." James hesitated. "Would you like to see?" David flipped through several pages of his sketchbook, revealing drawing after drawing of the same subject. Maya. Maya serving food, Maya laughing, Maya with her hair in a ponytail, Maya crouched down talking to a child-height figure that was clearly David himself. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "David, these are beautiful. Is this really how you see me?" In David's drawings, Maya looked radiant, kind, important. Not like a struggling waitress counting tips, but like someone worth remembering, worth capturing in careful pencil strokes. "He started drawing them the day after our first lunch," James said quietly. I think you're the first person outside of family he's ever really connected with." Maya looked up from the sketchbook to find James watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "James, there's something I need to give back to you." She pulled the $20 bill from her wallet, now slightly crumpled from being carried around for 2 days. "You left this Thursday, but I think you made a mistake. The meal was only $12. James stared at the money, then at Maya's face, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You think I tipped you by accident, didn't you?" Maya's voice was small, vulnerable. "I mean, I know money's tight for you, and $20 it's a lot." "Maya." James reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I meant to leave that tip. You've been kind to David, patient with him in ways that most people aren't. You've made our lunches something to look forward to instead of something to endure. That kindness is worth far more than $20. But I'm just doing my job." "No," James interrupted gently. "Your job is to take orders and serve food. Everything else, learning David's preferences, cutting breadsticks into shapes, showing him pictures of birds, treating him like a complete person instead of a collection of symptoms, that's not your job. That's your heart." Maya felt tears threatening again. "You don't understand. I can't afford to be someone's charity case, James. I can't start something with you if you see me as someone who needs rescuing. Is that what you think this is?" James's voice was soft but intense. "Maya, look at me." She met his eyes, seeing something there that made her pulse quicken. "I'm not trying to rescue you. You're the one who's been rescuing us. Every Tuesday and Thursday, you've given David something I couldn't give him. Acceptance without judgment, patience without pity. You've given me something too." He paused, swallowing hard. "You've given me hope that maybe we're not as alone as I thought we were." Maya studied his face, looking for signs of deception or condescension, but finding only sincerity. "James, I need to know something. And I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay, what do you do for work? Really? Because there are things that don't add up. The way you dress, the cash payments, how you heard about the restaurant flooding so quickly." Maya took a deep breath. "I need to know who you really are." James felt the moment crystallize around him. The point of no return, where he would either tell Maya the truth and risk losing everything, or continue the lie and guarantee that whatever they built would be built on deception. He looked at David, still absorbed in his drawings, then back at Maya's expectant face. "You're right," he said quietly. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Maya's expression closed off slightly, preparing for disappointment. "My name is James Romano. Romano, as in Romano's family restaurant. My great-grandfather started the chain in 1952 with a single location in Brooklyn. Now we have over 800 restaurants in 12 states." Maya stared at him, her face cycling through confusion, understanding, and something that looked like betrayal. "You're rich," she said flatly. "Very rich. And the 5th Street Romano's, where I work, is one of my restaurants, yes." Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing. "So when you've been coming in for lunch, paying with small bills, letting me cover part of your meal that one time, I was researching our locations, going undercover to see how they operate from a customer's perspective." James's voice was barely above a whisper. "It started as business, Maya. But it stopped being business the first time I saw you with David. How long have you known?" Maya's voice was dangerously calm. "How long have you known about my grandmother's medical bills, about me rationing her medication, about me working double shifts just to survive. James flinched. Maya, please let me explain. How long? She repeated. I noticed you were struggling financially after a few visits, but I didn't know specifics until recently. Maya laughed, but it was a bitter sound. God, I'm such an idiot. Here I was worried that you might pity me when the whole time you were. What? Studying me? Taking notes on the poor waitress who was so desperate for kindness that she'd give away free food. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, James? Maya stood up abruptly. Were you planning to put this in some corporate report? Employee exhibits inappropriate emotional attachment to customers. Recommend disciplinary action. Maya, please sit down. Let me explain. But Maya was already backing away from the table, her face flushed with humiliation and anger. You know what the worst part is? It's not that you lied to me. It's that I actually started to believe that someone like you could care about someone like me. That maybe, for once in my life, I was worth more than just the service I could provide. You are worth more, James said desperately, standing up as well. Maya, everything I said about David connecting with you, about you giving us hope, that was all true. My feelings for you are real. Your feelings. Maya's voice rose, causing other cafe patrons to look over. You mean your feelings for the entertaining poor girl who made your corporate research more interesting? The one who was so grateful for scraps of attention that she didn't question why a supposedly broke single father could afford to tip her entire hourly wage. David looked up from his drawings, sensing the tension and beginning to rock slightly in his seat, a sign that he was becoming overwhelmed. Maya noticed immediately, her anger warring with her instinct to comfort the boy. I'm sorry, David. I didn't mean to raise my voice. But when she reached toward him, James stepped between them, protective instincts kicking in. I think you should go, he said quietly. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Excuse me. David doesn't handle conflict well. If you're going to leave anyway, it's better if you leave now, before he gets more upset. Maya stared at James, seeing clearly for the first time the gulf between their worlds. He could protect his son from unpleasant emotional scenes because he had the power to dismiss the people causing them. He could play dress-up as a regular customer because he had the luxury of choosing when to reveal his true identity. He could afford to be generous with tips and dinner invitations because none of it actually cost him anything significant. You're right, Maya said, her voice steady now cold. I should go. Thank you for reminding me of my place. She walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. For what it's worth, James, David is an amazing kid. He deserves someone in his life who sees him for who he really is, not what they can get from him. I hope someday you'll understand the difference. And with that, Maya walked out into the rain, leaving James standing in the cafe with his son's drawings scattered across the table and the taste of ashes in his mouth. David looked up at his father, his dark eyes wide with confusion and loss, and pointed toward the door where Maya had disappeared. For the first time in 2 years, David spoke. Maya, he whispered, his voice small and broken. Maya, come back? James sank into his chair, his son's first words in 2 years cutting through him like glass. I don't know, buddy. I don't know. Outside, Maya stood in the rain and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not just for the loss of James and David, but for the loss of the version of herself that had dared to believe she might be worth loving. The truth had set them free, all right. Free to discover that sometimes the truth was the cruelest thing of all. 3 weeks had passed since the revelation, since Maya learned that the quiet man who counted change was actually James Romano III, owner of the empire she served. 3 weeks since her world had tilted on its axis, since she'd discovered that kindness and wealth weren't mutually exclusive, that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil. The November air was crisp as Maya walked toward Riverside Park, her heart beating faster with each step. James had asked to meet her here, away from the restaurant, away from the weight of corporate expectations and the curious eyes of customers who might recognize him. It was their first real date since everything had changed, since truth had replaced secrets, since Maya had chosen to believe in the impossible. She found him sitting on a bench overlooking the water, David beside him feeding breadcrumbs to a family of ducks. The sight made her chest tighten with warmth. Even here, in this moment that was supposed to be about James and Maya, David was included, valued, centered. It was one of the things that had convinced her James's feelings were genuine. His son wasn't an obstacle to overcome, but an integral part of any future they might build together. Maya. David looked up as she approached, his face lighting up with the same joy she'd seen that first day with the cardinal photo. Over the past weeks, as Maya had become a regular presence in their lives, David had begun to show more emotion, more connection. He still didn't speak, but his comfort with Maya was unmistakable. "Hey, handsome," Maya said, settling onto the bench beside him. "How are our duck friends doing today?" David pointed excitedly at a particular duck with distinctive markings, then at Maya, then back at the duck. James translated with a smile that reached his eyes in a way Maya was still getting used to: open, unguarded, real. "He named that one Maya because she always takes care of the others," James said. "She makes sure the smaller ducks get their share of the bread." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. Even in David's world, she was defined by her capacity to nurture, to protect. "I'm honored to share a name with such a good mama duck." David nodded solemnly, as if this was a very serious matter indeed, then returned to his careful distribution of breadcrumbs. "How are you?" James asked quietly, his hand finding hers on the bench between them. Really? It was the question he'd been asking variations of for weeks, ever since Maya had agreed to try again, to build something real on the foundation of truth rather than comfortable lies. How was she handling the revelation of his wealth? How did she feel about the disparity between their worlds? Was she okay with the media attention that might come if their relationship became public? "I'm adjusting," Maya said honestly. "Some days it feels normal, like you're just James and I'm just Maya and we're two people who care about each other. Other days I remember that you could buy my entire neighborhood, and I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." James's grip on her hand tightened. "Maya, but," she continued, "I'm learning that those feelings say more about my insecurities than they do about us. You've never made me feel less than. You've never made me feel like your charity case or your experiment in slumming. You've just loved me, even when I couldn't understand why." The word hung between them, love. They'd been dancing around it for weeks, feeling it in every shared glance and gentle touch, but this was the first time either of them had spoken it aloud. "I do love you," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love your kindness, your strength, the way you see beauty in things other people overlook. I love how you make David feel normal, accepted, valued. I love that you write letters to soldiers you'll never meet and grow herbs on your fire escape and know exactly how to fold fitted sheets." Maya laughed through her tears. "That's a very specific list." "I could go on," James said seriously. "I love that you tip the grocery store clerk extra when you see she's having a bad day. I love that you learned sign language so you could communicate better with David. I love that you called me out on my deception instead of pretending it didn't matter." "When did I learn sign language?" Maya asked, confused. James smiled. "You've been unconsciously signing basic words during our conversations. Thank you. More, friend. I think you picked it up from watching David's therapy videos on YouTube." Maya stared at him. She had been watching those videos, late at night after her shifts, trying to understand David's world better. She hadn't realized the signs were becoming part of her natural communication. "I want to be part of this," she said suddenly. "Not just your girlfriend who you see on weekends. I want to be part of David's team, part of his support system. I want to learn everything, sign language, autism advocacy, whatever he needs. I want to be family." The last word came out as barely a whisper, loaded with years of longing for belonging, for permanence, for people who would choose her again and again. James lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving her face. "Maya Chen, you already are family. You've been family since the day you gave David extra breadsticks and called them magic. You've been family since you saw his patterns as art instead of symptoms. David knew it before I did." As if summoned by his name, David looked up from the ducks and crawled across the bench to nestle between Maya and James. It was unprecedented. David rarely initiated physical contact with anyone, even his father. But he settled against Maya's side like it was the most natural thing in the world, his small hand finding hers. "I think," Maya said softly, "this might be the happiest I've ever been. Even though dating me means dealing with corporate lawyers and media attention and board members who think I'm losing focus." James asked. Especially because of that, Maya replied. Because it means you think I'm worth it. Worth the complications and the questions and the risk to your perfect CEO image. James turned to face her fully, his free hand cupping her cheek. Maya, you're not a risk to anything important. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me and David. You're the reason I remember why my grandfather started this company. To bring families together, to create places where people feel cared for and valued. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to change things. Not just at Romano's, but everywhere. I want to create a foundation for autism awareness and support. I want to fund programs that help kids like David and families like ours. I want to use this platform for something that matters. James's voice grew stronger, more confident. And I want you to help me do it. Maya's breath caught. James, I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about running foundations or... You know everything about seeing people who are invisible to everyone else. You know about making someone feel valued with small gestures. You know about love that doesn't count the cost. James smiled. Besides, you won't be a waitress for long. What do you mean? I mean I'm promoting you to Regional Community Outreach Coordinator. Your job will be to visit Romano's locations and make sure we're living up to our promise of being a place where families feel welcomed and cared for. Especially families with special needs. Maya stared at him. You can't just create a job for me because we're dating. I'm not creating a job for you. The position already exists. We just haven't filled it with anyone who actually understands what community outreach means. Tony's been telling corporate for months that the 5th Street location's success comes from the staff genuinely caring about the customers. He specifically mentioned you in his reports. Tony mentioned me? He told them about the extra breadsticks, the way you remember customers' preferences, how you make special accommodations without being asked. He said you turn first-time visitors into regulars because you make them feel like they matter. James grinned. Apparently, corporate had been wondering how to bottle that magic and spread it to other locations. Maya felt overwhelmed, the magnitude of the change washing over her. A real job, with benefits and a salary that would cover Grandma Lou's medication without rationing pills. The ability to make a difference in other people's lives on a larger scale. A partner who saw her potential and wanted to build something meaningful together. Have you ever had someone believe in you more than you believed in yourself? How did it change the way you saw your own possibilities? Share your stories. Sometimes we all need reminding of our own worth. There's something else, James said, his voice dropping to the tone that meant he was about to say something important. I've been thinking about David's future, about what happens when he gets older and needs more independence. I want to start a transition program, apartments designed for adults with autism, job training programs, social supports. That sounds amazing. I want to call it the David and Maya Center. Maya's eyes filled with tears. James, you can't. I can and I will. Because David's breakthrough moments have all happened with you. Because you've shown me that autism isn't something to be fixed or hidden. It's just a different way of experiencing the world. And because, James took a shaky breath. Because I can't imagine building David's future without you in it. David looked up at them, seeming to sense the emotional weight of the moment. He pointed at Maya, then at James, then brought his hands together in what Maya recognized as the sign for together. Yes, buddy, James whispered. Together. Maya leaned across David to kiss James, tasting salt from her own tears and the promise of a future she'd been afraid to dream about. When they broke apart, David was smiling, not his usual small, private smile, but a wide, joyful grin that transformed his entire face. And then, so quietly that Maya almost missed it, David spoke. Family. The word was whispered, barely formed, but unmistakably clear. His first word in 2 years, and it was the thing Maya had longed for her entire life. James was crying openly now, pulling both Maya and David into a fierce hug that felt like coming home, like finding the missing pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. Yes, Maya whispered against David's hair. Family. The ducks continued their lazy circles on the water. The November sun painted everything golden, and for the first time in her life, Maya Chen knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Later, walking back to James's car with David between them, each holding one of his hands, Maya felt the last of her resistance crumble. This wasn't about money or class differences, or the vast gap between their previous lives. This was about three people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, truth over comfort, hope over the safety of low expectations. "James," she said as they reached the parking garage. "Yeah, I love you too. Both of you. More than all the stars." David looked up at her with his bright, knowing eyes, and Maya could swear she saw her own future reflected there. A future full of magic breadsticks and corporate boardrooms, autism advocacy and family dinners, the everyday miracles that happened when love was allowed to grow without limits. It was better than any fairy tale she'd ever imagined, because it was real. Because it was theirs. Because it was built on the foundation of seeing each other clearly and choosing to stay anyway. The best kind of love story wasn't about finding someone to complete you, Maya realized. It was about finding someone who helped you become the person you were always meant to be. The boardroom fell silent as James Romano III walked in, his usual composed demeanor replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. The morning's revelation had hit him like a freight train. Romano's corporate had fast-tracked the closure of the 5th Street location, Maya's restaurant, effective immediately. "Gentlemen," said Richard Patterson, the company's chief operating officer, barely glancing up from his tablet. "We're here to discuss the 5th Street property. The numbers don't lie. Rent's too high, profit margins too thin. We've got a buyer interested in converting it to luxury condos." James took his seat at the head of the mahogany table, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the folder containing Maya's professional death sentence. 3 months ago, he would have seen this as a smart business decision. Today, all he could think about was Maya's face when she'd told him about her grandmother's medical bills, her volunteer work, her dreams of someday opening her own small restaurant. "Sir," Patterson's voice cut through his thoughts. "We need your signature to proceed with the closure. 90 days notice to staff, inventory liquidation, the works." James stared at the documents. His signature would eliminate Maya's job, David's safe space, the place where he'd learned to hope again. But refusing to sign would raise questions he wasn't prepared to answer. "I need more time to review this," he said finally. Patterson frowned. "Sir, with respect, time is money. Every day we delay costs us. I said I need more time." James's voice carried an edge that made everyone in the room straighten. "Schedule another meeting for next week." As the board members filed out, murmuring amongst themselves, James remained seated, staring at the closure documents. He'd been living a double life for months, and now both sides of his existence were colliding in the worst possible way. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria, David's caregiver. David asking for Maya. Says he wants to show her his new bird book. Still meeting for lunch today. James closed his eyes. How could he face Maya and David today, knowing what he knew? How could he sit across from her and pretend everything was normal when he held the power to destroy her livelihood? But David was counting on their Thursday lunch. David, who had spoken his first words in 2 years just yesterday evening, a whispered Maya nice, when James had tucked him into bed. James grabbed his coat and headed for the door. He would go to lunch, he decided. He would find a way to tell Maya the truth about who he was, and maybe somehow he could find a way to save the restaurant too. Maya hummed softly as she prepared for the lunch rush, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Last night's conversation with Grandma Lou had given her courage, and this morning she'd made a decision. She would return the $20 tip to James, and then she would take the leap and say yes to dinner. For the first time in years, Maya was allowing herself to hope for something more than just survival. "Maya," Tony called from the kitchen. "Corporate's here. Some big shots in suits. They want to talk to all the staff in 10 minutes. Maya's stomach clenched. Corporate visits were never good news. The last time suits had shown up, they'd eliminated the breakfast shift and cut everyone's hours. She smoothed her apron and tried to push down the anxiety rising in her throat. The big shots turned out to be 3 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. They gathered the staff in the dining area, their expressions businesslike and cold. "I'll keep this brief," said the lead executive, a thin man with silver hair and dead eyes. "Romano's corporate has made the decision to close this location effective December 1st. That gives you 90 days to find alternative employment. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Around her, she could hear her co-workers' gasps and whispered curses, but everything seemed to be happening underwater. Close the restaurant. 90 days. Find alternative employment. What about severance? Asked Janet, the afternoon shift manager. What about references? You'll receive your final paychecks and any accrued vacation time. References will be handled through HR. The executive was already packing up his briefcase. That's all. And just like that, they were gone. Maya stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, watching her coworkers scatter, some in tears, others in anger, all of them facing the same impossible question. What now? Maya. Tony's voice seemed to come from very far away. You okay? She wasn't okay. She was drowning. Without her job at Romano's, she couldn't afford Grandma Lou's medication, couldn't pay rent, couldn't survive. At 26, she was starting over with nothing but her savings account balance of $347 and a resume that screamed disposable service worker. The lunch rush would still happen. Customers would still come in, expecting their usual service, having no idea that their waitress was calculating whether she had enough money to last until Christmas, including James and David. Maya's heart shattered as she realized what this meant. No more Tuesday and Thursday lunches. No more watching David's face light up when she brought him shaped breadsticks. No more quiet conversations with James about books and birds and the small miracles that made life worth living. She'd finally found something worth hoping for, and it was being taken away before she'd even had the chance to really hold it. At 12:30, Maya watched through the window as James and David approached the restaurant, David skipping slightly in his careful, measured way. James was smiling, actually smiling, and Maya realized with a crushing certainty that she would have to tell them goodbye. Hi, Maya. David's voice was small but clear, and Maya's composure cracked completely. David's first words to her, and they would probably be among his last. Hi, sweetheart, she managed, her voice thick with unshed tears. Hi, James. James studied her face, concern replacing his earlier smile. Maya, what's wrong? She led them to their usual booth, her hands shaking as she poured David's water into his preferred glass. James, I need to tell you something. The restaurant is closing. I'm losing my job. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. James went pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table. What? When? December 1st. 90 days. Maya sat down across from them, no longer caring about protocol or Tony's rules about fraternizing with customers. I'm sorry, but this means I won't be able to see you and David anymore. David looked between them, his young face creased with confusion. Maya, go. I have to, baby. I'm so sorry. James felt like he was being torn in half. Maya was sitting across from him, heartbroken and terrified, and he was the cause of her pain. He had the power to stop this, to save the restaurant, to protect her job. All he had to do was reveal who he really was. But how could he tell her now? How could he explain that he'd been lying to her for months, that he'd watched her struggle with money while he commanded a fortune, that he'd let her believe he was just another struggling single father? Maya, he said carefully, maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Maybe you'll find something better. The words were out before he could stop them, and they landed like a slap across Maya's face. A blessing. Her voice was barely a whisper. James, I don't think you understand. This job isn't just my career, it's my lifeline. I can barely afford my grandmother's medication as it is. Without this income, she trailed off, unable to voice the terrifying possibilities. I'm sure you'll figure something out, James said, hating himself even as he spoke. You're smart, you're hardworking. Someone will be lucky to have you. Maya stared at him, something shifting in her expression. You don't get it, do you? This isn't some adventure for me, some temporary setback. This is my life falling apart. Maya, I didn't mean. You know what? Maya stood abruptly, her professional mask finally cracking. I thought you understood. I thought you saw me as more than just. But you're just like everyone else, aren't you? Poor Maya will figure it out. Poor Maya always does. She pulled the $20 bill from her apron pocket and slammed it on the table. Here. I've been trying to give this back to you for days because I thought you made a mistake. But maybe you didn't. Maybe this is exactly what you think I'm worth, your pity. Maya, no. Don't. Tears were streaming down her face now. Just don't. I let myself believe that maybe, for once, someone saw me as worthy of something real. But I was wrong. I'm always wrong. She turned to David, who was watching the exchange with wide, frightened eyes. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. And then she was gone, disappearing into the kitchen, leaving James and David alone in the booth with the $20 bill lying between them like evidence of everything that had gone wrong. David looked at his father, his bottom lip trembling. Maya sad. James couldn't speak. He'd spent months building something beautiful with Maya, something that had brought his son back to life, and he'd just destroyed it all with his cowardice and his lies. Daddy. David's voice was small and scared. Maya come back? James closed his eyes, knowing that the answer was probably no. He'd had the chance to tell Maya the truth, to save the restaurant, to be honest about who he was and what he felt for her. Instead, he'd chosen the safe path, the protected path, the path that preserved his secret at the cost of everything else. In trying to protect himself, he'd lost the two most important things in his life: Maya's trust and David's happiness. The $20 bill stared up at him from the table, a reminder of all the ways he'd failed to be the man Maya deserved, the man his son needed him to be. Outside, snow began to fall, and James realized with brutal clarity that winter was coming for all of them. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the city into a watercolor painting where everything bled at the edges. James stood at his office window on the 42nd floor, watching the drops race down the glass like tears he couldn't shed, and tried to remember what his life had been like before Chen had turned it upside down. 14 days. It had been 14 days since she'd walked out of Romano's on 5th Street, since she'd looked at him with such profound betrayal that he'd felt something inside his chest actually break. 14 days since David had stopped eating anything but plain crackers, since his son had retreated so far into himself that even their bedtime ritual couldn't reach him. 14 days of living in hell. Sir. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, hesitant in the way it had become since the scene at the restaurant. The board is ready for you in conference room A. James straightened his tie, Armani today, because armor came in many forms, and gathered the reports scattered across his desk. The 5th Street location analysis, customer satisfaction surveys, profit margin projections, all the numbers that painted Maya's restaurant as a liability to the Romano's empire. All the numbers that meant nothing compared to the look in her eyes when she'd realized who he really was. The boardroom was exactly what you'd expect from a multi-million-dollar corporation. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city James was supposed to conquer. 12 board members sat around the table like judges, their expressions ranging from mildly interested to openly hostile. James, said Richard Patterson, the chairman, his silver hair perfectly styled despite being 73 years old. We need to discuss the 5th Street situation. James took his seat at the head of the table, the position his father had groomed him for since childhood, the throne he'd inherited along with the weight of expectations and the burden of other people's livelihoods. The numbers are clear, continued Patricia Wong, the CFO, sliding a tablet across the table. 5th Street is underperforming by every metric that matters. High labor costs, low turnover rate, excessive food waste due to oversized portions. The profit margin is barely acceptable. However, added Marcus Chen, no relation to Maya, though the shared surname made James's chest tighten. Customer satisfaction scores are among the highest in the chain. Repeat customer rate is exceptional. Employee satisfaction is above average. Customer satisfaction doesn't pay dividends, Patricia shot back. We have shareholders to consider, growth targets to meet. 5th Street is prime real estate in a gentrifying neighborhood. We could rebrand it as Romano's Express, cut the staff by 60%, streamline the menu, double the profit margin within 6 months. James stared down at the numbers, seeing Maya's face in every percentage point. Maya, who worked double shifts and still found time to cut breadsticks into fun shapes for his son. Maya, who knew the names of every regular customer and remembered their usual orders and their stories about arthritis and grandchildren and lost loves. Maya, who had looked at him like he was worth loving, right up until the moment she realized he'd been lying to her for months. "There's another option," James said quietly, his voice cutting through the corporate jargon like a blade. "We keep Fifth Street exactly as it is." The silence that followed was deafening. "James," Richard said carefully, "I understand you've developed some personal attachment to this location during your research, but—" "Personal attachment?" James laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Is that what we're calling it when we remember that our restaurants are supposed to serve actual human beings instead of just profit margins?" Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Your grandfather built this company, yes. But your father grew it into an empire by making hard choices. Sentimental attachments to underperforming assets are a luxury we can't afford." "My grandfather," James said, standing up slowly, "built Romano's because he believed food could bring families together. He believed in creating places where people felt welcome, where they could afford to celebrate small moments and comfort each other through hard times. When did we decide that was worth less than an extra 2% profit margin? When the board of directors became legally obligated to maximize shareholder value," Richard replied flatly. "James, you're not thinking clearly. This Chen situation has obviously affected your judgment. Don't." The word came out sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't reduce what happened to a situation. And don't pretend this is about one woman when it's about the soul of this company." James walked to the window, looking down at the city where Maya was somewhere among the 8 million people, hating him with a passion that matched the love he'd thrown away through his cowardice. "Do you want to know what I learned during my research?" James asked, not turning around. "I learned that Romano's used to mean something. It used to be the place where a single mother could afford to take her kids for dinner once a month, where elderly couples could have date night on their fixed income, where a struggling father could bring his disabled son and know they'd be treated with dignity." He turned back to face the board, seeing his father's ghost in their expectant faces. "I learned that we've traded everything that made Romano's special for profit margins and growth targets. We've become exactly the kind of soulless corporation my grandfather swore he'd never build." "And what exactly are you proposing?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. James looked around the table at these people who held the fate of thousands of employees in their hands, who made decisions about communities and families based on spreadsheet cells and quarterly projections. "I'm proposing we remember what we're supposed to be," James said. "I'm proposing we keep Fifth Street open, fully staffed, with the current menu and the current management. I'm proposing we use it as a pilot program to prove that treating employees well and serving quality food can coexist with profitability." "And if the pilot program fails?" Patricia challenged. "Then I'll personally absorb the losses," James replied without hesitation. "But it won't fail. Fifth Street works because the people who work there care about what they're doing. They care about the customers, they care about the food, they care about each other. You can't manufacture that kind of culture, but you can destroy it. And we've been destroying it, location by location, for years." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying James with the intensity of a man who had built his fortune on reading people's tells. "This is about more than business philosophy," he said finally. "This is about a woman who walked away from you because she found out who you really are." James felt the words hit like physical blows, but he didn't flinch. "Yes," he said simply. "It's about Maya. It's about the fact that she fell in love with a man who doesn't exist, and I fell in love with a woman who deserves better than lies and deception. It's about my son, who connected with her in ways that 2 years of expensive therapy couldn't achieve. It's about the fact that I've spent so long hiding behind this company, behind this wealth, behind these suits and titles, that I forgot how to be an actual human being." He sat back down, leaning forward to rest his elbows on the table. "But it's also about the fact that Chen represents everything Romano's was supposed to stand for. Generosity without expectation of return. Kindness as a default setting. The belief that everyone who walks through our doors deserves to feel valued and cared for. If we close Fifth Street, if we fire Maya and everyone like her, then we're not a restaurant company anymore. We're just another corporate machine that chews up communities and spits out profit reports." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of decision. "What about your son?" Patricia asked quietly. "You said this woman connected with him. What happens to David if you choose the company over personal relationships?" James closed his eyes, seeing David's face the morning after Maya had walked out of their lives. His son had stood at the kitchen window for an hour, watching for cardinals that didn't come, his small body rigid with a confusion that James couldn't explain or fix. "David stopped eating 3 days ago," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He keeps looking toward the door like he's waiting for Maya to come back. His therapist says he's experiencing what she calls attachment disruption. He formed a bond with someone who disappeared without explanation, and now he doesn't trust that anyone will stay." James opened his eyes, meeting each board member's gaze in turn. "My son is 8 years old, and he's already learned that the people you love leave without warning. His mother taught him that lesson, and now I've reinforced it by letting Maya walk away instead of fighting for what we had. If I choose Romano's corporate interests over the possibility of getting her back, I'm teaching David that profit margins matter more than love. That success is measured in stock prices instead of human connections." "And if you choose her over the company?" Richard asked. "If you fight the board's decision and it costs you your position as CEO?" James thought about his father, who had died of a heart attack at 58 while reviewing quarterly reports. He thought about his grandfather, who had lived to 93 and spent his final years telling stories about customers who had become like family, employees who had named their children after him, communities that had grown up around Romano's locations. He thought about David, who deserved a father who fought for love instead of running from it. "Then I'll find another way to provide for my son," James said. "I'll find work that doesn't require me to compromise my values or lie about who I am. I'll build a life that David can be proud of, even if it's not the life my father planned for me." He stood up again, this time with the weight of finality. "I'm calling for a formal vote," James announced. "All in favor of keeping Romano's 5th Street open with current staffing and management, maintaining our commitment to community-focused service over pure profit maximization." The votes came slowly, reluctantly, but they came. 7 in favor, 5 opposed. The motion carried by the slimmest of margins, but it carried. "The pilot program is approved," Richard said, making notes on his tablet. 6 months to prove profitability can coexist with your idealistic approach to restaurant management." James nodded, accepting the terms even as his heart hammered against his ribs. He'd won this battle, but he'd lost the war that mattered most. Maya still hated him. David still wasn't eating. And James still had no idea how to fix what he'd broken. But as he walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the corporate armor of his expensive suit and executive title, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of choosing love over safety. Now he just had to figure out how to convince Maya that the choice meant anything at all. The rain was still falling when James stepped outside the Romano's building, and for the first time in 14 days, he didn't mind getting wet. He had a son to feed, a woman to win back, and a life to rebuild from the foundation up. The hardest part was over. He'd made his choice. Now came the even harder part: living with the consequences and hoping that love could survive the weight of truth. What choice would you make? When everything you've built your life on conflicts with everything your heart needs, which voice do you listen to? I think we all face moments when we have to choose between what's safe and what's real. Tell me about a time when you had to choose love over fear. 3 weeks had passed since Maya walked out of Romano's, and the silence felt like a physical weight pressing against James's chest. He'd made his choice, stepping down from day-to-day operations, putting his shares in a trust, walking away from the empire his grandfather had built. But the victory felt hollow without Maya to share it with. David hadn't spoken a word since that day. Not the soft humming that usually filled their quiet moments, not the small sounds of contentment when he arranged his toys. Just silence, broken only by the occasional whimper when he looked toward the restaurant window during their drives through the neighborhood. James had tried everything: new therapists, different restaurants, even hiring a private chef to make David's favorite foods at home. But nothing worked. His son was grieving, and James felt powerless to help him. The Romanos on 5th Street had been saved. James's first act as the new majority shareholder had been to increase wages, improve benefits, and mandate that no locations would be closed without extensive community input. But Maya wasn't there to see it. She'd quit the day after their confrontation, and no one seemed to know where she'd gone. James had driven past her apartment building dozens of times, but he'd never worked up the courage to climb those 4 flights of stairs. What would he say? How do you apologize for a deception that wasn't meant to hurt, but caused so much pain anyway? Daddy. James nearly dropped his coffee mug. David was standing in the kitchen doorway, his dark hair messy from sleep, clutching his favorite bird book. David. James's voice cracked. Did you just call me Daddy? David nodded, then walked slowly to where James sat at the breakfast table. He climbed into his father's lap, something he hadn't done in months, and opened his book to the page with the cardinal. Maya, David said clearly, pointing to the bird. James's eyes filled with tears. His son's first word in weeks, and it was her name. You miss her too, don't you, buddy? David nodded, then leaned his head against James's chest. Maya home. And suddenly, James knew what he had to do. Maya was arranging flowers at the farmer's market when she saw them. Her hands stilled on the sunflower stems, her heart hammering against her ribs as James approached her booth with David by his side. She'd been working at the market for 2 weeks, helping Mrs. Chen, no relation, just a shared surname, with her flower stand. It wasn't much money, but it was enough to cover the basics while she figured out her next move. Grandma Lou's condition had stabilized, and they'd found a community health program that helped with medications, but Maya still felt like she was treading water. Maya, James said softly, and the sound of her name in his voice made her chest tighten with longing and pain. What do you want? She asked, not looking up from the flowers. I want to tell you the truth. All of it. Even the parts that make me look like a fool. Maya glanced up then, noting the changes in his appearance. James looked thinner, tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. His usual composure was cracked, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. I already know the truth, she said quietly. You're James Romano III. You own a restaurant empire. You were slumming with the help to make yourself feel better about corporate decisions. No, James said firmly. That's not Maya, please. Just 5 minutes. If you still want me to leave after that, I'll never bother you again. David tugged on Maya's apron, looking up at her with eyes that were too old for his 8-year-old face. Maya home, he said quietly. Maya's resolve crumbled. Whatever anger she held for James, she couldn't deny this little boy who had stolen her heart from the very first day. 5 minutes, she said. James took a shaky breath. I started visiting Romano's locations because I was trying to understand why our customer satisfaction scores were dropping. I was going incognito to see what was really happening in our restaurants. But Maya, I swear to you, the moment I saw you with David, it stopped being about business. How am I supposed to believe that? Because I walked away from it all. James pulled out his phone, showing her a news article from the business section. I stepped down from operations. I put my controlling interest in a trust that prioritizes employee welfare and community investment. I can't run Romano's anymore, but I can make sure it's run the way my grandfather would have wanted. Maya stared at the headline. Romano Air restructures empire, prioritizes workers over profits. You gave up your company? I gave up a job, James corrected. I kept what mattered, my son, my integrity, and the hope that maybe someday you might forgive me for being too scared to tell you the truth from the beginning. Maya looked down at David, who was still clutching her apron. Why didn't you just tell me? From the start. Because I was a coward, James admitted. Because I'd been hurt before by people who wanted my money more than they wanted me. Because I'd never met someone who saw David the way you did, who made me feel like I was worth something beyond my bank account. He paused. And because I was falling in love with you, and I was terrified that knowing the truth would change everything between us. It did change everything, Maya whispered. I know. But Maya, what I felt for you, what I still feel, it was never about charity or pity or corporate strategy. It was about the way you made my son laugh. The way you saw beauty in his differences instead of problems to fix. The way you made me feel like maybe I could be a good father, a good man, without having to be perfect. Maya's hands shook as she set down the flowers. You lied to me for weeks, James. You let me worry about paying rent while you could have bought my entire building with pocket change. You watched me count out exact change for groceries, and you said nothing. You're right, James said simply. I was selfish and scared, and I hurt you. I hurt us. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. Daddy, sad, David observed, patting James's hand. Maya sad. Maya looked at this little boy who had somehow become part of her heart, then at his father, who had shown her what it felt like to be seen and valued and loved. I was so angry, she said quietly. Not just about the money, but about the lying. It felt like you thought I wasn't worth the truth. Maya, you were worth everything, James said, his voice breaking. You are worth everything. You're worth more than any fortune I could ever inherit. You're worth changing my entire life for. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the last of her walls crumble. I missed you both so much it physically hurt. We missed you too, James said. David hasn't spoken in weeks. Until this morning, when he said your name and told me you were home. Home. David nodded earnestly. Maya home. Daddy home. David home. Family. Maya knelt down to David's level, tears streaming down her face. Is that what you want, sweetheart? For us to be a family. David wrapped his arms around her neck, holding on tight. Please, he whispered, a word she'd never heard him say before. Maya looked up at James, seeing her own hope and fear reflected in his eyes. If we do this, if we try, no more secrets. No more lies. Just us, exactly as we are. Just us, James agreed, kneeling down to wrap his arms around both Maya and David. Exactly as we are. What do you think makes a family? Is it blood, or is it the people who choose to love and care for each other? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what home means to you. 6 months later, Maya stood in the kitchen of their new home. Not the mansion James had inherited, but a modest house with a big backyard where David could watch birds and Maya could grow her herbs. Romano's on 5th Street had been renovated and renamed Maya's Kitchen, with Maya as the manager and part owner, serving the community with the same warmth and care she'd always shown. David was in his room, arranging his bedtime books, chattering away about the Cardinal family that had built a nest in their oak tree. His speech was still developing, but he spoke more each day, especially when he was excited about something. Story time. Maya called, and David came running, his face bright with joy. As they settled on the couch together, David between his parents, James reading while Maya traced patterns on their son's back, Maya marveled at how different her life looked now. Not because of the money or the security, but because of the love that filled every corner of their home. Maya, David said quietly, looking up from his book. Happy. Me too, sweetheart, she said, meeting James's eyes over their son's head. Me too. James reached over and took her hand, the simple wedding band on her finger catching the light. They'd married in a small ceremony 3 months ago, with David as their ring bearer and Grandma Lou as Maya's maid of honor. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding Maya had dreamed of as a little girl, but it was perfect, real, honest, and built on a foundation of genuine love. Thank you, James whispered. For what? For taking a chance on us. For believing that sometimes fairy tales can be real. Maya squeezed his hand, thinking of all the Tuesday and Thursday lunches that had led them here, all the breadsticks and cardinal sightings and moments of quiet understanding that had grown into something beautiful. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, James replied. Both of you. More than all the stars. David looked up at them, his dark eyes bright with contentment. Family, he said with satisfaction, then settled back against Maya's shoulder to listen to the rest of the story. And Maya realized that sometimes, the best stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with happily ever after. And this is just the beginning. What did you think of Maya and James's journey? Have you ever had to choose between pride and love? Share your thoughts below. I believe we all have stories of unexpected love that changed our lives.